Okay, Jane.
Okay, good afternoon, Councillor Allen. You can start the meeting.
Thank you, Jane. Welcome everyone to today's Planning Committee meeting where we are all attending remotely. I'm Councillor Alan Hunter, Chair of the Planning Committee, and I can confirm a sound check has been done. In addition to committee members, we also have officers joining us to assist with our discussions, together with public speakers for some of the planning applications being considered, who will be introduced at the appropriate time. For those viewing with live stream recording, committee members are identified with an asterisk next to their name. Can I remind members that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed and will be available for viewing after the meeting. Should the live streaming fail, the meeting will continue and a recording will be available through the Council's website following the conclusion of the meeting. Can I also remind members that translation facilities are available and to choose your language of choice. If you wish to speak, please use the raised hand function. You can also use the chat facility, but please note I may not be able to monitor the chat facility during the meeting. All microphones will be muted. If you have indicated your intention to speak, I will invite you to turn on your microphone. If you leave your device for any reason, can you please ensure you are muted and that you turn your video off. Moving on to the agenda, item 1 is apologies for absence.
2 apologies from Councillors Tristan Lewis and Dave Roberts.
Thank you. Item 2, declaration of interest, Code of Local Government Conduct. Members are reminded that they must declare the existence and nature of their declared personal interests. Can't see any hands up. I'll take it that there are no interests to declare. Thank you. Item 3, urgent matters.
There are no urgent matters, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Item 4 is the minutes. To approve and sign as a correct record the minutes of the previous meeting, which were on your packs, pages 6 to 17. Everybody's happy with the minutes. Can I have a proposer and seconder, please? Councillor Dave Ruiz, I saw your hand go up as a proposer. Councillor Nigel's hand went up. Can we have a show of hands, please, at this point? Okay, thanks, members. Okay, moving on to the item 5, which is deferred applications from previous committee meetings. Under code reference 048423, proposed change of use of land and associated development to form a 6-unit glamping site, land at Bryn Trisor, Tinros, Merdy, Llanwim, Conway, and that's on your pages 18 to 32. This has come back because we went against the officer's recommendation at the last meeting, so it's come back to us again. So I'll hand over to the planning officer at this point.
Thank you, Chair. There is nothing to report on the addendum. Okay, members.
I've seen Councillor Peter Lewis's hand up. Councillor Peter, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. I think members discussed this at the last meeting, and I'd just like to reaffirm our decision for the reasons we gave them. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Peter. Councillor Eva Lloyd.
Yeah, dwi hefyd yn hapus I ail gefnogi'r argymhelliad eto. Diolch.
Okay, I did see Councillor Andrew. I think he's probably going to support. Okay, members, we have a proposal and a second that we stay with the decision made at the last meeting, and that was to go against the officer's recommendations and to allow this application. Jane will call out your names. Councillor Kenny, you putting your hand up for?
Just to say that we basically, together with the conditions, that it's for holiday purposes only, Chair, yeah?
Yeah, I think that was noted at the last meeting, so thanks for that, Councillor Ken. Okay, Jane, if you want to call out the names.
Sorry, Peter Lewis?
Peter, do you want to come back in again?
Yes. No, I'm sorry, I just haven't taken my...
Okay, not to worry.
Okay, Jane.
Okay,
we'll go to
thank you, members. If you can clearly indicate if you're for, against or abstaining. Councillor Philip Capper.
For.
Councillor Chris Cater.
For.
Councillor Pauline Heap-Williams.
For.
Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe.
Obliged.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
For.
Councillor David Johnson.
4.
Councillor Peter Lewis.
4.
Councillor Sue Lloyd-Williams.
O blaid.
Councillor Yvonne Lloyd.
O blaid.
Councillor Dave Rees.
4.
Councillor Austin Roberts.
O blaid.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
O blaid.
Councillor Ken Stevens.
4.
And Councillor Trevor Stott. Councillor Trevor?
Blaid, sorry, Jane. Blaid.
Thank you, members. That was unanimous.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you, members. Okay, item 6 on the agenda is to consider the following reports. Code reference 048781, conversion of existing boarding house into 12 self-contained flats to be occupied by adults with integral care facilities for supported living. Replacement windows and elevations amendments to include 2 entrance doors and 2 new window openings. It's Hathaway 45, Pwyllgor Avenue, Colwyn Bay, Conway, and that is on your packs, pages 33 to 39. We have speakers on this item. The speakers will have 3 minutes each, and you will be advised when you have 30 seconds left. I'll bring in the first speaker is speaking against, which is Mr. David Harries.
Diolch, David. I'm speaking on behalf of the 3 next door neighbours to the proposed development. We've made 2 formal submissions, which I invite you all to read in detail. Here I will just touch on the most important elements. First is detail. Your own officers have noted that there is insufficient detail. It really is important to understand that much of what is set out is rather superficial and contradictory, and in some key respects misleading. Secondly, parking. Only 15 spaces are shown on the plan, but 40 would be a reasonable minimum. Parking on the road cannot be at all acceptable at this location because of the real and direct danger parking will cause to the children using the primary school immediately opposite. Thirdly, the applicant says this is not to be a Class C2A secure residential institution. This is clearly untrue. The apartments are locked with keypads, and the residents do not have the codes to those keypads. The applicant avoids providing such details in its application. The residents are to be supervised 24/7, and if they are allowed out of their apartments, they are often supervised 2 to 1. They are in no sense free, they are kept secure. They have to be because we find that the residents have serious challenging behaviour. That is, behaviour where the physical safety of the person or others is placed in serious jeopardy. The applicant seeks staff who have experience of dealing with people with a history of offending. Claim difficult to square with its assertion that it takes no ex-offenders. Either way, the applicant says there is no risk. If this is correct, then it can only be because the residents are kept secure. They can't have it both ways. That means that this application is defective because secure residential accommodation is C2A, and this is an application for simple C2 use. Incidentally, they also say that they've had no complaints about their existing facilities. This is simply untrue, as our supplementary submission illustrates. Now, there's no disagreement that these facilities are required, but government guidance acknowledges that they should be placed in places where they will not be a nuisance to neighbours, and that siting them in ordinary residential neighbourhoods is inappropriate. No consideration of alternatives has been provided by the applicant. It does, however, in my view, beg a belief that a facility which is going to house people who pose a serious risk of harm to themselves or to the public, and it has to be borne in mind also that serious challenging behaviours include not just physical harm, but inappropriate sexual behaviour, are to be accommodated in the middle of a residential area, and most importantly,
30 seconds left.
Immediately opposite primary school. So for all of these reasons, this should be a very straightforward decision for you. If despite this, you are minded to postpone the decision and ask for more information, it should certainly not be on the basis of delegated authority. In short, this sort of decision is exactly what the planning system is for.
Thank you very much. That's 3 minutes.
Not being next to a primary school. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Okay, I'll bring in the next speaker who will be speaking in favour, Mrs. Helen Shepherd, who is the applicant. Mrs. Shepherd, you have 3 minutes, and again, you'll be advised when there's 30 seconds left. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Oh, hello. Hi. Sorry. At ProCare Wales, we provide regulated services for individuals with learning disabilities. We're regulated and registered with Care Inspectorate Wales, or CIW. That registration dictates that we may only provide services that we are registered to provide. In our case, that means that we can only provide services to individuals who have a learning disability. Contrary to hearsay, we do not and have never provided services to individuals who require primary mental health services, and we do not provide services to individuals who have been convicted of committing criminal offences. We could not offer these services and maintain our CIW registration, pardon me, of 20 years. Individuals who are born with a learning disability are disadvantaged from the moment they draw breath. And although thankfully society has taken huge steps in the form of countering discrimination and valuing people, there are still those that believe that our individuals should be locked away from the public in institutionalised settings. Right now, there are hundreds of Welsh citizens displaced and desperate to come home, and equally as many waiting on long lists for appropriate services to become available. Local services are at capacity, and specialist services like ours are almost non-existent. Hathaway House has a small part to play in the solution. I first created this model of support 15 years ago, and 10 minutes down the road at Arnold House in Llandulus, a registered care home regulated by CIW, but different to the traditional care home model. Just like Arnold House, Hathaway House is designed to offer the opportunity of an ordinary life to some of society's most vulnerable people. I believe that an ordinary life is having access to the same opportunities, experiences, and relationships that most of us take for granted. Our support model does not offer a bedroom in a communal house. If it did, I wouldn't be sitting here, as there are 22 perfectly adequate bedrooms all ready to be utilised at Hathaway House. Instead, I'm seeking to almost half the potential occupancy to 12 individuals. Our model provides 2-bedroom apartments, each with their own front door, kitchen, bathroom, living room, etc., providing each of our individuals with something not too different to an ordinary life, which is sadly all too often outside the grasp of a person born with a learning disability. Our individuals receive one-to-one support 24 hours a day, meaning that 60 full-time positions are created. However, these positions run over 24 hours on a rota basis, meaning that no more than 15 employees are on site at any time. No more than 15 employees are on site at any time. The apartment model within a registered care home is tried and tested in both Arnold House, Llandulus, and Pwyllgor in Rhuddlan. Both homes have C2 planning, and both homes support individuals who can be subject to deprivation of liberty safeguards or DOLS. Contrary to popular belief, under the Mental Capacity Act 2005, DOLS provides safeguards that ensure that people in care homes are looked after in a way that does not inappropriately restrict their freedom.
3 minutes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Shepherd. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, I will hand over to the planning officer at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. There's quite a lot in the addendum, so please bear with me. I'll try and avoid repeating points that have already been made, but as I said, there is quite a lot. We have had further representations both from the applicant and from other parties. In terms of representations from other parties, we've had a representation from Brenny Construction. You may be aware that Brenny Construction are involved with the development of the Mary Bamber Convalescent Home site, which is immediately to the east of the application site. I can show you photographs in a minute showing the position between the two. Among the concerns they raise are concerns relating to residential amenities such as associated lighting, new access doors, and overlooking from rooms onto neighbouring dwellings and the gardens. I think you have to bear in mind that this is an application to use an existing building. There will be some modifications to the building, but the building will be more or less, the external appearance of the building will be more or less as it is now. There are 2 additional windows shown on the ground floor, and it's also proposed to convert garage doors into windows. but given the extent of screening, mutual screening between the two boundaries, we do not feel that this would cause any material increase in overlooking between the two sites. We have had quite a detailed response from Aaron and Partners, further response. And essentially, many of the points they made have already been covered by a previous speaker. They are reiterating their view that the use classes order, it should be considered in the class 2A rather than class 2. You'll recall that class C2 is for residential institutions. So that includes things like nursing homes, care homes, or in the case of this particular property, the previous use as part of a residential school. Whereas Class C2A is for secure residential accommodation, and the examples it gives in the use classes order for secure residential institutions are for things such as prisons and detention centres and immigration centres and so on. Aaron and Partners have referred to a current job advertisement. The advertisement does appear on has recently appeared on the applicant's website. And it does say that, it does note that one of the desirable attributes would be to have, for the applicant to have experience of working with individuals with an offending history or at serious risk of developing one. The objectors believe that this is evidence that they are intending to occupy or use the facility as a secure residential unit. However, we have noted the response previously given by which you've just heard by the applicants on this point. They refer to a care inspectorate Wales report, which was carried out at Arnold House in 2018, and also a care inspectorate report at Plas Lona in Rutland. Those are two facilities which are operated by the same applicant, and which the objectors say have been subject to an inspection as a result of recent concerns raised. They are requesting information from the police in relation to one of those sites. I don't have anything further to report on that, so we just have to note that. And they also say that the parking ratio, they believe the parking ratio is inadequate. I'll come to that point in a minute. We have also had further representations from individuals, 3 further representations from residents, and also a representation from Councillor John Roberts, which is based on matters which have already been mentioned previously. We've had quite a lengthy supplementary statement from the applicant, which provides further information on how the proposed use would operate. I think you've heard most of what's been said already, but essentially what the applicants are saying is that the majority of the individuals being supported lack mental capacity in regards to their own safety and are subject to deprivation of liberty safeguards. What they say is such safeguards are commonplace in residential establishments for dementia, so they're not necessarily indicative of the use class being C2A rather than C2. In order to be considered for a placement, an individual must have had a primary diagnosis of learning disability. And this can include physical disabilities, secondary mental health conditions, and other neurodiversities. What they say is they do not accept referrals for individuals who do not meet the criteria of having a learning disability. ProCare Wales operate on a transition phase to ensure long-term compatibility and suitability for both the individual and the service or care home. And their model provides individual apartments with one-to-one staffing. Each apartment has its own front door, 2 bedrooms, so one of these would be for a carer, a kitchen, bathroom, and lounge. And they say that no referrals are taken from outside Wales, and there is a strong desire to keep local children close to their family. They stress that it's not for secure accommodation. In relation to questions raised by the Highway Authority, what they say is, if you'll just bear with me, staff will be on site. There will be a maximum of 12 staff per shift, so there will be more than adequate parking spaces. So with 5 visitor spaces and 12 spaces for staff, there are a total of 17 car parking spaces. We have had discussions over whether a tactile crossing should be provided at the junction between Queen's Drive and Pwyllgor Road, and we considered that one is necessary. It wasn't secured as part of the Mary Bamber development site. And Highways have responded by saying they have no objection to the proposal based on the additional information provided. So we're satisfied that the Highway concerns have been addressed. In terms of concerns about the management of the facility, we are satisfied that it is development. The proposed use does fall within the C2 use class rather than the C2A use class. The use classes order cites examples within the C2A classes as including things like prisons, detention centres, immigration centres, and so on. And whilst that's not an exhaustive list, it does show that it is intended to apply to an entirely different character of premises than the premises that will be subject to this current application. So we do consider it falls within the C2 use class, and there are safeguards in place to minimise the impact on the local community. So our recommendation has been minded since the committee report was written, and it's now minded to grant planning permission, and that the Development and Building Control Manager be authorised to determine the application and the delegation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. I can see a hand up. It's Councillor Chris Cater.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, I'm just wanting to ask about the consultation, because I note in the report that there's not been any consultation with our own social care director and managers. I'm just wondering whether that has taken place now, because there's going to be, well, I assume there'll be increased pressure on our social workers and medical provision. I don't know. I mean, the speaker in favour did say there were specialist services which would be provided by the applicant, but I just wonder whether there would be more pressure on our social care provision. That's one thing, if you could answer, Kerry. And the other thing is the vulnerable people. You know, we need provision for vulnerable people, and I completely support that. And I support that happening locally, but I'm just wondering, the speaker did talk about the whole of Wales, and I'm just wondering, will these people who are going to be housed in the 12 apartments, will they be local people from our county or at least from neighbouring counties, or will this really be for the whole of Wales? So if I could have answers to those two things, please. Okay, thanks, Councillor Chris. I'll bring in I'll bring in Kerry first to answer the question, then I can see Councillor Smith's waiting to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'll answer the second question first. In terms of the admissions, all I know is that they will be residents of Wales, but I don't know whether they will be defined more narrowly than that. In relation to social care, I don't believe that the social care department of the council has been consulted, but the application would in any case be subject to vetting, or the proposed use rather would be subject to vetting by the Care Standards Inspectorate, and they would ensure that the site is adequately staffed by an appropriate ratio of staff to clients, and also that the staff are appropriately qualified. So I would expect the unit to be self-sufficient in terms of being able to provide care for their own residents.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. You happy with the reply, Chris, or do you want to come back?
Yes, I was just hovering on proposing that we defer this application till these questions are a bit more clearly determined. I don't know. I'll come back after the other speakers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Chris. Councillor Nigel Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just lower my hand while I remember. Right, I've got a couple of questions, really. I wonder if Kerry could perhaps answer. We heard the applicant say that the residents will have learning difficulties and not criminal records. Is that the fact, that it won't be housing anybody with a criminal record? And is it possible to place a restriction on the property that it's a non-secure unit? My other question is temporary permission. I know last meeting officers were keen to offer a temporary permission to another business in Conway, and I wonder if it's possible to grant a temporary permission for this development.
Okay, Kerry, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, I'll so firstly, in terms of whether it will be restricted to being a residential institution or a secure residential institution, that's a reasonably straightforward one, because essentially residential institutions are in a separate use class to secure residential institutions, and they would need to apply for planning permission if they wish to use it as a secure residential institution in future. So, I mean, the planning permission that we propose to issue will be specifically for a residential institution, and it will be conditioned more closely so that it reflects the actual model that the applicants are proposing. I think we do have to bear in mind that this site already does have an established use right for a residential institution. It formed part of a residential school, and residential schools also fall within the C2 use class. So it could be converted to another form of residential institution as a single unit without planning permission already. We have to accept the reality of the situation. In terms of whether temporary planning permission, when planning permission could be granted on a temporary basis, then technically it could. However, you do have to bear in mind that there is a significant capital outlay involved in adapting buildings and converting them and making them suitable for a particular use. And if the planning permission was restricted to a very short period, say 1 or 2 years, it could prove prohibitively expensive. And at the end of the day, the applicant could decide that it's too much of a risk without any security that the application could be extended. So I don't think that's a condition which we as officers would suggest. It's something which we could explore in dialogue with the applicants if there is a possibility in that regard. But I would have to bear in mind that there are practical constraints against granting planning permission on a temporary basis. The other consideration you have to bear in mind is, as I mentioned earlier, the site already does have an unrestricted use right for a C2 use. So it could be used, if it was not being subdivided, it could be used for another type of C2 use, which would raise similar considerations and concerns. So I would question what benefit granting planning permission for a temporary use right would actually give the committee.
Okay, well, if I could, I think I would be happier if the application had a condition that it was to be used solely as a non-secure site, and conditioned that it didn't house anybody with a criminal record. The temporary permission, I think, is just, the applicant is quite sure that there won't be any issues with this development, and I think with those conditions, that will probably be the fact. I was just questioning whether the applicant wants to put her money where her confidence is. But I'll wait for further debate. But I think if we can condition those two restrictions, I think we could possibly look at solving this issue today. Thank you.
Okay, can I bring in Head of Legal, Reinhard Gareth, before any other members come in? Thank you, Ren.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the conditions, yes, I agree with Kenny. In terms of a temporary permission, I honestly think that would be unreasonable in these circumstances, given the nature of the development and also the nature of the existing use. I think that would be classed as an unreasonable condition. In terms of secure accommodation, again, I think we'd be struggling there in terms of the necessity test on the condition, because of the nature of the application before us. Now, the only thing we could do, I guess, is, as you say, Councillor Nigel, in relation to what they're asking for, there will be, there is a method statement in terms of what they're proposing, and you could tie them to that, rather than a specific that it's not to be a secure accommodation. You could tie them to what they're asking for. So, the description of the use as classed, and that would cover the second point in terms of criminal record as well, because they've declared, haven't they, in terms of what the type of individuals that will be residing here. That's been explained fully, so we can tie them to that in terms of a scheme. So I'm not sure if Kerry agrees with that, but I think that would probably be the way forward on that one.
Okay, I'll bring Kerry back in there. Sorry, Councillor Trevor, if you just bear with us.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. In terms of conditioning, we certainly can condition it to be more narrowly identified than the type of than for C2 uses generally. So it would essentially be tied down to their business model. I think it would be very impracticable to enforce any restriction against ex-offenders, bearing in mind that ex-offenders can already live in the community. So I would be wary about including that as a specific restriction, but we can include a more general restriction that it's tied down to, essentially tied down to the business model that they've included as part of the application.
Okay, thanks for that, Mr. Thomas. Councillor Trevor Stott, thank you for your patience, Trevor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, planning, as some members will know, is not just about development, but it's also about land use. And this application has raised a lot of concern with local residents regarding that use. Part of the proposal is for provision of a service for young adults with challenging behaviour. In the addendum report, the officers contend that this falls within the C2 use class order and not C2A, which covers the uses where it is concerned with preventing residents from leaving the premises. It goes on to note that the individuals will be subjected to deprivation of liberty safeguards. It goes on further to compare this as a common practice in residential nursing homes and not treated as a secure accommodation. Mr. Chairman, I've just lost my place here. I don't believe that we can make similarities between residents in nursing home and residents with challenging behaviours. I believe that this is the worry for the residents living locally, and given the proximity of a preparatory school, its head does not support this application. I believe that this will create a perception fear. Given that this site is in a conservation area, it is a surprise that the conservation officer was not consulted. Likewise with the provision of bins, and that the refuse and recycling department was not consulted, where it was in an application to follow this. I don't believe there's sufficient parking space on this site, and given its proposed usage, and just like to say, this, Mr. Chairman, would lead to, in my view, parking onto the main road. And perhaps members are not aware, but there is a pre-application going through on a site across from this proposal for 101 dwellings. And on those plans, it shows 2 exit or entries on Pwyllgor Avenue. So one can see that there could be some exacerbation and there could be traffic problems there. So, Mr. Chairman, I have to support these local residents, and I will not be supporting this application.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Thanks, Councillor Trevor. Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe, please.
Sorry, I couldn't get my microphone on. I've obviously lived in Llanfairpwll in the vicinity of Bryn and Airth Hospital all my life. I worked there for 10 years prior to being a councillor. There are people who are not aware of the danger to themselves or of their actions in hurting other people sometimes. That isn't the same as being malicious or dangerous. It is the fact that those people haven't got the capacity to understand their movements. It's very similar to somebody with dementia who does something very similar, and the more difficult dementia patients are very similar or worse than the people that are likely to be held here. These are people who need looking after, need a helping hand, and need a safe environment. I think we look on the danger to others, but they're more of a danger to themselves, and they've got to go somewhere. Here's a very suitable building being offered as a premises for people like this, and I think it's too easy to condemn it when people with learning difficulties. I've also been a governor at Derwent College in Oswestry for the last 20 years, and I'm well aware of how much work can be done with people like this. And I honestly think it's a very good use of an old building which has ceased to be what it was meant, what it had latterly been. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Andrew. Councillor Chris Cater.
Yes, thank you. I'm happy to support Councillor Nigel. I think he made a proposal there with some conditions, but I was just wondering whether he would add another condition concerning the admissions, whether this could be formulated, defined more narrowly than all Wales, whether we could have a more locally based admissions policy for, you know, what will be a very valuable unit here, I'm sure.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Chris. Okay, can't see any more speakers. Councillor Nigel, did you actually make a proposal? If you did, can we? Sorry, I'm just bringing Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe. His hand's just gone up before we go into the next bit. Councillor Andrew.
I've been also a visitor at our care homes for children that have had to go into care. And if that child becomes more difficult, we have to go anywhere in Britain to find a place for them. And I think to restrict this too much, if all of Wales isn't enough, I'm sorry, I really don't think if somebody in Powys, for instance, needed somewhere like this, that we couldn't take them. I think we're being too prescriptive. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Andrew. Councillor Nigel, did you make a proposal? And in light of what Councillor Chris and Councillor Andrew have just said,
I was interested to hear what the Officer Kerry Thomas had to say about placing a condition on the unit, but he didn't he didn't give us the full rundown on it. So how are we going to restrict the use?
Okay, I'll bring in Mr.
Kerry,
Thomas.
if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, and then Councillor Peter has got a hand up to speak. So, Kerry.
Essentially, we would be looking to restricting the use in terms of the use proposed being restricted to the clients identified, the business model identified in the applicant submission. So that essentially the one criterion that all the clients would have in common would that they have learning disabilities. Some may have other conditions, but not all of them. They would all have learning disabilities. And I think that would provide a precise and enforceable basis for its inclusion within a planning condition.
Yeah.
In terms of whether any further restrictions should be included, I think you have to be very clear that if you are asking for additional conditions to be included, then they have to be justified on the basis of the planning conditions circular. And I would remind members that there are essentially 6 tests that are applied to every planning condition. So they have to be necessary, relevant to planning, relevant to the development, precise, enforceable, and reasonable in all respects. So if you are looking, for example, at restricting the catchment area, you would need to, we would be looking at clarification from you as to how such a condition complies with the 6 tests. It's very much the onus is on the planning authority to be able to defend its justification on how planning conditions comply with the circular test rather than the other way around. I do tend to agree with Councillor Hinchcliffe in that it would be unduly restrictive to prohibit anybody from outside Wales. The clients operate on a, I'm not sure if it's always basis, but all their clients are within Wales. I don't see how such a condition would comply with all of the 6 tests, but I will hear what you have to say.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Thomas. Councillor Peter Lewis, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think if members had actually attended a recent task and finish group, they would have been made aware of, regrettably, continual increase in terms of children with learning disabilities. And I think this facility is much needed. In answer to Councillor Chris, I've no doubt that given the comment that the applicant made earlier in terms of wanting these facilities near to people's home, that any within North Wales, for instance, will actually have first draw on the facility. So, Chair, in the absence of any firm proposal up to now, I would like to go with the officer's recommendation with the added proviso that they stick to the business model as per the application.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Peter. Councillor Nigel, I'll bring you back in now, then I can see Councillor Andrew, then Councillor Evo. So Councillor Nigel, please. Yes,
I'm happy to second Councillor Peter Lewis's proposal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe.
Sorry, I thought Nigel was going to oppose it. I was going to second it. There we are.
Thank you. Councillor Evo Lloyd, please.
Yeah, allan o angen heidwyd, dwi'n hapus I gefnogi'r argymelliad hefyd. Diolch yn fawr.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe, your hand's back up again.
Oh, God, didn't mean to.
No, that's okay. Thank you very much. Okay, members, I think this has been debated at length. We now have a proposal from Councillor Peter Lewis that we go with the officer's recommendations, which is to grant the conditional planning permission and the development and building control manager be authorised to determine the application under delegation. We have Councillor Nigel Smith, who seconded it. So we will take this to the vote. Please, Jane.
Okay, thank you, members. Please indicate if you're for, against or abstaining. Councillor Phil Capper.
For.
Councillor Chris Cater.
For.
Councillor Pauline Heap-Williams.
For.
Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe.
For.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
For.
Councillor David Johnson.
For.
Councillor Peter Lewis.
For.
Councillor Sue Lloyd-Williams.
Oblaid.
Councillor Ivo Lloyd.
Oblaid.
Councillor Dave Rees.
For.
Councillor Austin Roberts.
Oblaid.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
Oblaid.
Councillor Ken Stevens.
For.
Councillor Trevor Stott.
Against.
Okay, thank you, members. That's 13 in favour and 1 against.
Okay, thank you, members. We'll move on to the next application, which has actually been withdrawn. which would have been 048566, which was the demolition of existing buildings on 328 Bayview Road. But this has been withdrawn from the agenda by the request of the applicant. So we will move on to 048719, which is the erection of one dwelling on land adjacent to Awelon in Trascoed Road in Llysfine. And that is on pages 57 to 64 of your packs. And we have a speaker on this one, which was Mr. Steve Goodwin, who's the agent. So Mr. Goodwin, as you've probably earlier heard, you'll have 3 minutes and you'll be advised when you have 30 seconds left. So Mr. Goodwin, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this application is twofold. Firstly, it will allow the couple who have lived within a village for over 30 years to continue to do so for their remaining years. And secondly, in the longer term, it will provide affordable housing for local need in accordance with the Council's policies. In order to achieve this, the applicant has offered to enter into a Section 106 agreement to ensure that the initial occupation of the dwelling is by the applicants only and that any subsequent occupation is for affordable housing for local need. The new dwelling could not therefore be sold off on the open market. So this is not a case where the applicant is seeking to achieve speculative development for financial gain. The objective is to allow Mr. and Mrs. Butterworth to continue to live in the village which they have for over 30 years. Both Mr. and Mrs. Butterworth are now over 75 years old and are finding living in the existing two-storey property extremely difficult. They have strong ties to the village, and their daughter lives next door and has lived in the village for over 20 years, and now their daughter lives with her too. Granddaughter, sorry, lives with her too. The proposal will allow them to continue to live in the village in a property that's designed specifically for the needs of elderly residents. The proposal therefore has both short-term and long-term planning benefits, providing for the needs of a specific group of the community in the short term, and long-term providing an additional housing for affordable housing for local need. Against these benefits, there is no material harm. The officer report confirms that there are no objections in terms of highway safety, parking and turning are adequate. There are no objections in relation to biodiversity, and there's no adverse impact on residential amenity. Officers also accept that there's no detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the landscape area or on the wider street scene. The overall benefits of the scheme therefore substantially outweigh any harm. The only harm identified by officers is that they do not believe the site would meet the affordable housing policy, as it does not directly adjoin the settlement boundary. The site is, however, only just over 100 metres from the defined settlement boundary. This is not an isolated site in the open countryside. Not only is it within around 100 metres of the village boundary, it also lies within a group of dwellings and is completely surrounded by existing domestic properties and their gardens. There would therefore be no encroachment into the open countryside as a result of the proposals. And this is reflected in the fact that there are no objections to the impact on the character of the area from the Council's landscape section, from your planning officers, and indeed from the CPRE. The officer report acknowledges that the site is well screened by existing landscaping and would, I quote, appear as an infill property within the existing cluster of houses in this area of the village.
30 seconds.
The benefits of allowing the scheme therefore substantially outweigh any harm. And finally, I note that the application has the support of the local member and the community council. Respectfully, therefore, I would ask members to grant planning permission for the proposed development, subject to the Section 106 agreement offered by the applicant. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Okay, I'll bring in the planning officer at this point, Mr. Kerry Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I have nothing to report as far as the addendum is concerned, but I may wish to come in later. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Phil Capper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members will be aware of my concerns about the lack of what we might call in old money, old age pensioners accommodation within the village of Llysfine. By which I mean small-scale bungalows which are either adapted or constructed to facilitate the needs of older people, wider doors, light switches and plugs at appropriate heights, sit-in showers, that sort of thing. In this case, the applicant is 75 and 76 years old. They've lived in the village for many, many years. The applicant himself has been active in the community here. He instigated a youth training scheme with the Festiniog Railway, and a number of youths in the village have taken part in that. At 76 and 75 years old, they are, of course, suffering the usual frailties that occur as we all age. The nature of the village is such that it's, the old village anyway, is such that it's rather spread out. Members who attended the site visit yesterday will have seen that it's a group of houses which are not actually part of the permitted development boundary, but they are consistent with the rest of the village, which are part of the boundary. It seems to be something of an aberration that this was missed off the LDP when it was first developed, that it was not within the development boundary, but you know, that's as it is. So technically it is in the open countryside, although it wouldn't appear to be so when you're actually standing on the site. Consultees, as has already been mentioned by the applicant's agent, have not raised any objections. The objections are purely on the grounds that technically it is within the open countryside. The community council actually asked for this to come as well as me actually calling it in before the planning committee, on the grounds that they were aware that, in fairness to officers, they would have no option but to recommend refusal on the grounds that it is in the open countryside, even though it isn't that open. So that was the community council's view on it, and indeed mine. The proposal in itself is for a very small bungalow, which is actually adjacent to the applicant's daughter. It actually has a gate coming from the applicant's daughter's back garden into the proposed area of development. What are the advantages for Conway? Well, the advantages for Conway are that we have the release of a large family house to the market. We have an additional provision of suitable accommodation for older people. And additionally to that, we hear about the pressures in our social services. It reduces the possibility or the probability of financial burden on the social service department by having the fact that the applicant and his daughter will live next door to each other and can support each other. Then there, of course, the financial advantage that we actually gain further rateable income from having this additional property. The applicant is prepared to enter into a Section 106 agreement, which will make this permanently affordable and available. And because it will be constructed to suit older people, it will be available to them and will be of more interest to older occupants than it will be to younger ones. So it would actually address the shortage of accommodation in the village for this sort of person. So therefore, I will be making a proposal to go against the officer's recommendation to refuse. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Phil. Councillor Peter Lewis, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered whether or not Kerry could actually put on the screen some photos, because I think there weren't many of us on the site visit yesterday. And I think the proposed site, as far as I was concerned, was part of an existing back garden. I think perhaps if there were any photos, it would perhaps be of benefit to my fellow councillors.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Peter. Kerry, do we have that?
Yes, I'll just ask Julia to bring the images on the screen. I don't think that's the right presentation. While we're waiting for the presentation to come up, I'd just like to point out the applicant's daughter does live nearby, but the proposal simply relates to the applicant's own land, so we wouldn't have control over the future ownership or occupancy of the neighbouring dwelling. So if you are minded to grant planning permission on the basis that I think it's the dwelling identified as Bryn Eithin on that plan, you do need to bear in mind that the local authority wouldn't be able to control the occupancy or ownership of that dwelling in the longer term. This is a location plan of the site with the site boundary shown in red and the applicant's existing site at Awelon shown edged blue. I have been asked to point out that the area to the two features to the south and west, which identify a waste tip and industrial units. I don't think we actually saw those yesterday, but objectors have pointed out that the waste tip is just a field, and the industrial units, they're understood just to be essentially domestic premises. I'm not able to verify that, but some of the objectors have referred to that in their representations. If we can go to the next slide, please, Julia. This is a slide showing the position of the proposed dwelling within the site. And as you can see, it's the proposed curtilage or planning unit would be around half the size of the existing. We've got a couple of elevation drawings. Next slide, please. So these are the essentially the west and north elevations, and the next drawing, please. And the east elevation, so that would be the elevation facing the road, and the south elevation. And on the next slide, we have a floor plan. So essentially the idea is to have basically a T-shaped bungalow with a main bedroom and a guest or carer's bedroom next to it. We can go on to the photos next. So this is a photograph of the site looking towards the applicant's own existing dwelling. The next slide, please. This is a view across the application site to the facing east. And the next slide, please. This shows similar views. Sorry, that's another view towards the applicant's own dwelling. The next slide, please. Again, this is a view facing south or southwest across the application site. The next slide, please. A view of the pond. The intention is to retain the existing pond. And the next slide, please. So essentially you can see the adjoining dwelling. You can see a timber shed towards the center of the image, and just beyond that, there's a dwelling called Brynathan, and my understanding is that that's the daughter's house. And the next slide, please. This is another slide of Bryn Ywelon. And the next slide, please. This is looking north from the application site up into Llysfaen. And the final slide, I think, this is looking south from the application site, and I think Brynathan is the house you can see at the far end. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Kerry. Thanks, Julia. I'll bring in Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe.
Well, obviously, as older people's champion, I can't help but support somebody that's trying to sort themselves out for their older retirement. As we can see, there's hardly a photo without another house in the background. I really don't see this as being an isolated house in the countryside. They are taking a very rational decision to build in their garden, to live where they have always lived, and to sell their existing house. I think we can only applaud that. I'm terribly sorry, but I will second the motion to go contrary to the officer's recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Andrew. Councillor Dave Rees, please.
Sorry, my thunder was just stolen there, Chair. I was going to second Councillor Phil's proposal that we go against the officer's recommendations. I was at the site visit yesterday, and I can't see anything against these people's proposal to build themselves a more comfortable home suitable for their age group in future life. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dave. Councillor Pauline Heat-Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to second Councillor Phil's proposal, so he stole my thunder, so I don't need to say any more because it's been said. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Lewis.
Well, thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask Kareen whether or not he could give us some guidance as to the position in terms of the 106 affordable dwelling agreement. it would strike me that if the current owner signs it to that effect, it has some legal standing, but I'd welcome his comment.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Ren. You can come in.
Yeah, I must admit, as you can imagine, I have some reservations about this application on a few points, really. One of them would be, you'll see that the previous application is quoted, and I'm quite sure that to grant permission here may possibly lead to other applications coming your way, and it doesn't comply, as has already been said, with national guidance and local guidance. In terms of the 106, I guess the issue here is the proposal is that initially that the individuals concerned live in the property. I suspect they wouldn't comply with the requirements of eligibility for 106 agreements, but we can cater for that in the agreement, I guess. But my concern would be, is this property affordable? And down the line, you may be finding yourself in a position where you're granting permission with a 106 on the property, and ultimately that it's not affordable in terms of our policies. Of course, it is a matter for you, members, absolutely a matter for you. But I would stress that it doesn't come within the exceptions locally and nationally, in terms of it's outside, it's in open countryside, so you shouldn't be granting permission for a dwelling or an affordable dwelling, and the only exceptions really would be for agricultural and etc. So it doesn't come within that. So I point that out in terms of an issue, but also the affordability issue may well be an issue going forward as well.
Okay, thank you, Ren. Flurry of hands went up then, so we'll start with Councillor David Ruiz. Thanks,
Chair. I just wanted to say that I thank Ryan for his guidance on that, but we've dealt with these applications in the past, and I think that every individual application should be taken on its own merits, and we can say yes to some and we can say no to others. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor David. Councillor Chris Cater.
Yes, the problem comes with when we say no to some, and then we're taken in front of an inspector to appeal, and we have to argue the reasons very intricately. And as I said before, in my own ward there are plenty of properties, large properties with large gardens. I can think of the ones in Bryn Puddow where we just wouldn't want an additional property to be put in each and every garden up there. It's all out of the settlement boundary. But Councillor Dave's quite right that we've done a site visit. Sadly, I couldn't be there yesterday, but I do appreciate all the photographs and so on that Kerry's put up and the explanations. Every application is determined on its own merits. But yes, each time we do this, this is the second one in Clisfine. Each time we do it, we're undermining our own policies, and the LDP policies are there for a purpose. And as I say, is every property with a big garden or piece of land beside it in Clisfine going to decide to put an application in for another house to be built there? So that's the concern I have, and I know I've discussed this with Councillor Phil before. It looks like, on balance, that this should be supported. I think I'll be abstaining on it, but yeah, it's not an easy decision.
Thanks, Councillor Chris. Very valid points made. Councillor Phil Capper, I'll bring you back in, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to come back in on this. Yeah, I appreciate all those comments that have been made. This very similar application has been in before from the site, and it went to appeal. And I noticed that the planning inspector noted that basically, because it didn't have a 106 agreement with it, that's why she refused it. Although acknowledging that it was, although technically in the open countryside, it is in a relatively built-up area, which is very similar to a lot of the rest of the old area of Clisfine. in that it's rather dispersed, but groups of buildings. And I'd just reiterate my comment that it's probably something of an aberration that it wasn't actually included within the settlement boundary in the first place. And also an observation that with the new local development plan, we would actually be, if not encouraging, at least accepting developments of this kind within the village. And to be honest, if there were, 3 or 4 more acceptable developments for older people's housing, that would still be quite welcome as long as it was appropriate. So it's just my final observations, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Phil. Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe, then Councillor Evo.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to reiterate that this is now an extra house for an older person who can manage. We have so few of them. Our village in Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogerychwr is packed with old up and down cottages, and all the new houses of any size are beyond the scope of most people. This is not going to be an expensive house, even if it's not in the affordable bracket, but it's still going to be somewhere where someone could retire from another house and free up a house. And it's terribly important that we have houses like this. There are very few bungalows in Llanfairpwllgwyngyllgogerychwr and no flats, and older people have very little choice whatsoever. And so here is a chance for somebody to make a very sensible decision. And I think we should go with it.
Thanks, Councillor Andrew. Councillor Evo Lloyd.
Yeah, just a question for Kerry, really. What is the actual square meterage of the property in relation to the standard affordable house?
Kerry?
I did a quick measurement and I can't remember the exact measurement, but it's roughly in the order of 140 square meters, which is quite large for an affordable property. I'd need to check it against DQR standards to see how it complies with policy. It is, I appreciate it's not a very big house, but it is larger than what would typically be approved as an affordable dwelling.
Okay, thanks, Kerry.
Thank you.
Let's see, Councillor Nigel's hand up. Do you want to come back in, Councillor Nigel?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's an interesting thing what Councillor Chris Cater was saying about policy and going against it. But when the policy isn't fit for purpose, this is when we have issues. And I think, in recent years, our rural members have come to realise that the policy that we wrote protecting their Welsh culture and language is actually turned round and bit them on the back. And hopefully we will address that going forward with our new LDP. But the issue is the policy. That's the problem. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Nigel. I'm glad you finished that sentence at the right point. Okay, members, we can't see any more hands up, so I will take to a vote. We have a proposal by Councillor Phil Capper, which has been seconded by Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe, that we go against the officer's recommendation and that we do grant permission for this application. So I'll hand it over to Jane and she will call out your names. Thank you.
Okay, members, please indicate if you're for, against or abstaining. Councillor Phil Capper.
For.
Councillor Chris Cater.
Abstain.
Councillor Pauline Heap-Williams.
For.
Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe.
Obliged.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
For.
Councillor David Johnson.
For.
Councillor Peter Lewis.
For.
Councillor Sue Lloyd-Williams.
Obliged.
Councillor Ivo Lloyd.
Obliged.
Councillor Dave Rees.
For.
Councillor Austin Roberts.
Mattel.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
Obliged.
Councillor Ken Stevens.
Sorry, against.
Councillor Trevor Starts.
Jane.
Okay, thank you, members. Just bear with me. That's 10 in favour, 1 against and 3 abstentions.
Okay, thank you, Jane. Thank you, members. So this will come back to committee in our November meeting because we have decided against the officer's recommendation, so it will come back to us. Thank you. I think this is the last one for today, is 048754, which is proposed development of 8 2P 2B affordable apartments of 50 Cliffvine Road, Old Colwyn. That was on your packs, pages 65 to 73. We don't have any speakers on this one, so I'll bring in Mr. Thomas, the planning officer.
Thank you, Chair. As you recall, we did a site inspection yesterday. There has been one administrative change to the application. The application was originally submitted by the contractor, although it was made clear in the application that once the units are developed, they would be transferred to ADRA as the social housing provider and as the owner of the site. So the application is now made by ADRA themselves rather than by R.L. Davis. The only practical difference that means is that we would now be able to condition the delivery of affordable housing by condition. So it's effectively to be a condition requiring the development to be carried out by a registered social landlord. And that would mean that it would not be necessary to do it through a Section 106 agreement, which would take a lot more time. That's the only point I have in relation to the addendum. We haven't had a response from the Highway Authority on this application, other than to say that they have requested details of improvements carried out or to be carried out under the Active Travel Wales Act. The applicants have pointed out that the site is already accessible. They do not consider that any further improvements are justified. We haven't had a response from the Highway Authority to that point. I would bear in mind, however, that this site has previously been granted planning permission. It was granted planning permission back in either 2007 or 2008 without such a condition. So there would have to be a particularly robust justification for including it in this condition. And in the absence of that, I'm not able to say that any improvements to the footway network will be required. However, if we do receive highway comments before the decision is issued, we will obviously take those into account. But we're asking for delegated authority essentially to be able to determine this without taking it back to committee in future.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Thomas. Councillor Ken Stevens.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question, really. ADRA, they used to be North Wales Housing, is that right?
ADRA used to be part of Gwynedd Council, but they're now an independent group, and they do operate outside Gwynedd. Yeah,
it's an all Wales thing now, isn't it?
Yeah, I believe so.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Ken. Councillor Ivo Lloyd.
Yeah, we can't condition the fact that we need to encourage active travel on the site. I would be happier to support this if it did have active travel. The rock and a hard place yet. I am going to recommend. I think I'm going to support this. So I'm going to support this application. So.
Okay. Yeah. Are you proposing that we?
I'm proposing, yes.
Yep. Thank you. Yep. Councillor David Rees, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to second Councillor Ivo's proposal, Chair, because we were at the site yesterday. It's part built anyway, the foundations, and I think the fourth line of brickwork is already in. It's an application whose planning permission has expired. All we're doing is renewing it, and look forward to seeing this site developed in quite a beautiful area. Absolutely great. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Dave. Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe, please.
Well, again, as an older people's champion, I can only support something like this. It's got to be there for people. There's a crying need for this. So I absolutely support it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Andrew. Councillor Austin Roberts, please.
Diolch Mr Cadeirydd. Na, dim ond ategu beth sydd wedi cael ei ddeud yn barod. Dwi'n hollol gefnogol I unrhyw fath o sgîm sydd yn codi tai sydd yn fforddiadwy, a mae hyn yn gynllun fforddiadwy, felly dwi'n 100% tu ôl o. Diolch yn fawr.
Thanks, Councillor Austin. Okay, members, I can't see any other hands raised to speak, so we have a proposal that we grant conditional planning permission as per the officer's recommendation, and we allow the building control manager delegation to determine the application. So it's proposed by Councillor Eva Lloyd, there we go again, and let's see, Sue's smiling there, and seconded by Councillor Dave Ruiz. Just rolls off the tongue so easily there. Okay, I'll hand you over to Jane.
Okay, thank you, members. Please indicate if you're for, against, or abstaining. Councillor Phil Capper.
For.
Councillor Chris Cater.
For.
Councillor Pauline Heap-Williams.
For.
Councillor Andrew Hinchcliffe.
Obliged.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
For.
Councillor David Johnson.
For.
Councillor Peter Lewis.
For.
Councillor Sue Lloyd-Williams.
Obliged.
Councillor Yvonne Lloyd.
Obliged.
Councillor Dave Rees.
For.
Councillor Austin Roberts.
Obliged.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
Obliged.
Councillor Ken Stevens.
For.
Councillor Trevor Stotts.
Obliged.
Okay, thank you, members. That was unanimous.
Okay, thank you, members, and thank you to the officers, everybody involved in this afternoon's meeting. I think it's been a good meeting, some good discussion. So thank you, everybody. I will declare the meeting closed and see you all next month.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.